Today's webinar focuses on one of the most dynamic and fast-moving areas in our sector, the latest European policy developments shaping textile circularity. As the European Union accelerates its transitions towards a circular economy, new regulations are set to transform the way textiles are designed, produced, and managed throughout their entire life cycle. In this session, we'll explore several key initiatives currently taking shape. And we are delighted to be joined by Ekaterina Stoyanova from EURATEX, who will help unpack what these developments mean for the CISUTAC project partners, the ecosystem community, and for all professionals and researchers working in textiles and the circular economy. Before we begin, a quick housekeeping note. Please make sure your microphones are muted during the presentation, and we kindly ask you to save your questions. Ekaterina will let you know when you can ask them. Thank you for being here, and with that, let's begin our webinar.
Thank you very much, Lisbeth, for the introduction, and good morning to all participants. My name is Ekaterina Stoyanova. I'm Senior Policy Officer for Sustainable Businesses at EURATEX, and I'm responsible for textile circularity topics, also the green claims topic, and the infamous product environmental footprint methodology. It's a great pleasure to be part of the CISUTAC Sustainability Forum. During this webinar, I will walk you through some of the most important ongoing policies at EU level that impact our sector, so please use the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. Before we jump into the substantive part of this webinar, I would like to say a few words about EURATEX and what we do. We are the European Apparel and Textile Confederation. We represent European textile manufacturers in Europe throughout the whole value chain, from fiber to finished product, and in all applications, including clothing, home textiles, industrial applications like automotive or construction, and also medical devices. We're the official European textile and apparel industry body that represents the industry at EU level, and our core business is policy and lawmaking. We also have special initiatives on sustainability, for example, on microplastics and market surveillance, and we also participate actively in EU-funded projects on sustainability and innovation and skills. And one of the projects that we participate in is CISUTAC, hence also giving this webinar to the CISUTAC community and broader stakeholders. On the agenda for today, we have 4 main dossiers that we're going to touch upon. We're going to start with the Ecodesign regulation and latest developments on the legislation that will be for clothing. Then we're going to move to one of the latest EU-level initiatives on circularity, the so-called Circular Economy Act. We'll also talk about the Waste Framework Directive revision and EPR, as well as the end-of-waste criteria for textiles progress. And then last but not least, we're also going to talk about the Green Claims Directive and the very much linked to that product environmental footprint category rules for apparel and footwear. There will be 2 dedicated sessions for questions, and I will duly inform you when those take place. Without further ado, we're going to jump quickly into the first topic, which is Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation and the ongoing work that is dedicated to the apparel segment. I hope many of you have already heard about the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, which entered into force already in July last year. From an industry perspective, we call it a groundbreaking piece of legislation. It will change the way that products are made. It impacts all products on the EU market, so goes way beyond textiles, includes components and intermediate products, and there are some limited exceptions when it comes to food and feed products, medicines, plants, animals, and products thereof, and some specific vehicles. This piece of legislation also impacts all companies that place products in the scope on the EU market, regardless of whether these companies are based, be it within the EU member states or in third countries. Some of the most important elements within this piece of legislation, at least from a textile perspective, are that we will have minimum performance requirements for textiles, for example, when it comes to physical durability aspects or for inclusion of recycled contents. And we'll also have information requirements that will have to be passed through the so-called digital product passport along the value chain and then made available depending on the need to some authorities or the final consumer. We also have special provisions regarding unsold consumer products when it comes to the reporting of such discarded products, which apply to all kinds of product groups, not only to textiles, but also there is a ban on destruction of unsold consumer products, which specifically concerns apparel, accessories, and footwear, which enters into force next year. You might wonder who decides at what time what product groups will be governed by the ESPR. And we already have, since earlier this year, a working plan that was prepared by the European Commission, and it outlines which product groups will be legislated in the next 5 years. It comes to no surprise that we have textiles included, but here specifically referring to apparel. So we know that clothing will have its own legislation, as you can see in 2027. However, other segments like home textiles and technical textiles will not be regulated within this time period. But it is possible that that might be concerned with eco-design requirements in the future. The technical work for apparel has been ongoing since 2023. So when this working plan was published in April this year, to us as an industry, it came as no surprise. It simply confirmed the work that we had been doing for 2 years already. The work by the JRC is framed within the so-called preparatory study on textiles. You can see the relevant links on the slide and look for more details if you wish after the webinar. This preparatory study for textiles will be the foundation for the future legislation. So we expect that the JRC will outline some design options and some specific policy scenarios, which then will be elevated at political level and will be the basis for the drafting of the future legislation for 2027. And if we look into a bit more detail into how this JRC study is structured, you will see that we have 5 steps that we have, and we find ourselves more or less halfway through the process. So as I said, everything started in 2023 with the first initial questionnaire by the JRC, which looked into very general information from the industry, but also generally from textile stakeholders on certain definitions, scope, market analysis, user behavior, and certain aspects of the implementation of the EU eco-label and the existing voluntary green public procurement for textiles. Then that was followed by 2 milestones. And by milestones, you have to understand a draft report. So the JRC is doing some scientific research work, which also, of course, includes stakeholder consultation along the process, and then prepares draft reports which are published for further consultation. The first such draft report was published in at the beginning of 2024, and it covered more or less the same elements as the first initial questionnaire, but provided more or less a better direction of where the JRC was heading. The second such draft report covers eco-design technologies. For example, let's say on physical durability, the JRC looked into how it's possible to define physical durability for apparel products. So it outlined possibilities to define certain eco-design aspects. And then the JRC also looked into, again, user behavior, some environmental and economic impacts of the sector, and also some preliminary scoping exercise of used chemicals in the industry. What you can see on the right side of the slide is a screenshot of Article 5 of the Ecodesign regulation. This is something that I wanted to flag to you to somehow better understand why this whole technical process is very relevant. Under the ESPR, we have 16 potential eco-design aspects that can be included for any product group that falls within the ESPR. And it will be for these technical studies to outline which of all of these 16 are actually relevant and can be implemented for that specific product group. So in principle, you can have any of these 16 for apparel. And now within this technical study of the JRC, we will see which ones are the most suitable ones. In terms of the next steps, we will see the third report somewhere in December. And then we expect that the study will be finalized in Q2 2026. What is also relevant to note in this whole context, of course, as I said, the products covered by the ESPR would also have to carry a digital product passport. But for the purpose of this webinar, I thought it would be useful to know that there are two parts that we have to differentiate when it comes to the digital product passport. One is the DPP system, which you see on the left side, which will define the house, and it will be developed horizontally for all product groups. And by the house, we mean the whole interoperability question, all the standards and protocols that relate to the IT infrastructure of the DPP system. And this is currently very actively worked on by the European standardization body CEN. On the right side of the slide, when it comes to the DPP data, so what data will be fed into the DPP along the value chain and the way that it is made available to different stakeholders, we'll define indeed the what, and it will be developed through product-specific legislation, which for us is the process is already going by the Joint Research Center of the Commission. When we look broadly at the timeline for the ESPR legislation on apparel, we see that we have quite some steps that are left for us to do, not only from the JRC side, so from the technical analysis, but also at the policy level afterwards. So let me walk you through that. You can see that we are currently anticipating the two draft reports left for the JRC to publish. And then we expected that this technical work will be finalized in Q2 next year. And in the finalization of this work, we know that the JRC will put forward some specific design options for the sector, and it will also outline some potential policy scenarios. And based on these conclusions of the JRC, we expect that throughout 2026, the European Commission will conduct an impact assessment looking into the social and economic environmental impacts of these options, also including how those will impact companies in terms of costs and administrative burdens and how implementable they will be. Also looking from the enforcement point of view, which is very important. They will be in public consultation, which I think it will be very relevant for all of you, and the drafting of the legislation process. There will also be consultation with the so-called Ecodesign Forum, which is an expert group at EU level, including industry, NGOs, member states, and also academia on advising the Commission how to run things. And we expect, as I said, the adoption in the first half of 2027, of course, to be confirmed. When it comes to the implementation, based on the main regulation on the ESPR, we expect that it will take place at least 18 months after the legislation is adopted. And of course, the details on whether these 18 months are prolonged and how much, it will depend on the legislation itself and the detailed requirements that are set therein. From our standpoint, it is also important to note that for companies, the impacts will start from the moment the legislation is ready, because there might be a need for companies for certain time to adjust their processes, to arrange the data traceability along the value chain and its availability. And it is vital to understand that even if the legislation gives you, let's say, 2 years after for implementation, there will be some time before that cutoff date for companies to prepare. So we see the impacts already at an earlier stage. And this is the point where I will pause for just a few minutes to see if there are any burning questions before we move forward with the next part of the presentation. So please, the floor is yours. I will also look at the chat to see if there is anything. I see that there is a question on how it interacts with EPR, with extended producer responsibility. We will get to EPR a bit later in the presentation, and I'll be happy to touch upon that later on, if that it would be okay with you. So then we have both the EPR developments and the ESPR in the frame. And I do not see any more burning questions for this part. So I'll quickly then move forward with the next part on our agenda, which is the Circular Economy Act. I'll be very brief on the Circular Economy Act, as I mentioned that this is one of the most recent EU Commission initiatives from just a few months back. And the main objectives of this future Circular Economy Act will be to accelerate the transition to circular economy, to boost the supply and demand for secondary raw materials, to reinforce the single market for waste and recycled materials, and to promote the reuse, repair, and recycling of products. It is important to know that this initiative is still at an early stage. There was a first initial stakeholder consultation launched by the European Commission from August to November this year, just to get ideas from different industries, from also other stakeholders on what the needs are to indeed fulfill the objectives of the Circular Economy Act. It's also important to know that it might target certain specific elements in specific product groups. So we have learned, based on already some existing feedback from stakeholders, that specific elements may include extended producer responsibility, harmonization, can cover also public procurement, and this is specifically an element that has been noted as a possibility for the textile sector. So how to boost the demand for more sustainable textile products through green public procurement criteria. And we've also heard that there are some ideas to provide for more clarity and simplification in the process of how end-of-waste criteria are being developed. In terms of the timeline, as I said, we're still in a very early stage, but we know that the legal proposal should be out in Q3 next year. So from this point until Q3 next year, the Commission will be preparing the draft legislation. And then, of course, this will be a piece of legislation that would have to go through legal negotiations at EU level with the Parliament and the Council, with the member states, in other words. So we do not have clarity yet on what the specific timeline would be for this piece of legislation. But at this point in time, it is important for you to keep in mind that there will also be some further consultation opportunities in the future for the broader stakeholder community. And you might, if you wish, have a chance to give your input on specific ideas and measures for textiles. Jumping quickly into the Waste Framework Directive revision, which includes extended producer responsibility schemes and the end-of-waste criteria for textiles. So giving a broader overview on the waste legislation revision that recently took place, it is important to inform you that we now have EU legislation entered into force, creating mandatory national EPRs schemes. And just a bit of explanation for those of you who are not familiar with what EPR is. Extended producer responsibility aims to ensure that producers contribute to the costs of waste management and bear financial responsibility or financial and organizational responsibility for the end-of-life phase of the products that they place on the EU market. And if properly implemented, EPR could reduce the environmental impact of textiles. It could promote circular business models such as reuse and recycling, and generally contribute to more efficient end-of-life management. So now we have EPR for textiles at EU level. And you can see that the products that are covered in these EPR schemes at this stage are apparel accessories, home textiles, and footwear. And there is a possibility for EU countries to also introduce EPR schemes for mattresses. The companies that are concerned with extended producer responsibility are micro, small and medium-sized companies and large companies. This was something that was quite a contentious point during the negotiations, and it was important to include all players, be it small or large, in order to provide a level playing field. However, there are certain simplifications and facilitations in the legislation itself to support micro companies in fulfilling their obligations under this legislation. The fees that producers will pay for the products that they place on the market will be based on the weight of these products that they place on the market, where appropriate also on the quantity of these products. And there will also be a possibility to modulate the fees based on business practices. And there is the obligation to harmonize how eco-modulation works at EU level based on the ESPR. So based on the legislation that we just talked about. And in terms of eco-modulation, in simple words, this will provide the opportunities for producers that produce more sustainable products to pay less tax on their products, to incentivize eco-design and more sustainable and circular practices from producers. Funds collected through EPR will go through the waste management process, but importantly also to note is that some money would also go to research and development to improve eco-design and to scale up sorting and textile-to-textile recycling. There will be 27 national registries for producers, so Each member state will have their own registry where companies will have to register, but we should have a uniform format for registration at EU level in the coming months. Of course, there are also some obligations for online platforms to check some requirements before they offer products of third country producers on the EU market. And we'll also have an evaluation of this framework, which is very important to see how EPR schemes perform and what more could be needed, and the possibility to perhaps set reuse and recycling targets, but this will only be by the end of 2029. In terms of the next steps, very briefly on the timeline, you will see that the legislation was already published in the official journal of the EU and entered into force already in October. So now it should be in its implementation by the member states of the EU. We expect to have a harmonized registration format by April 2027. This is something that is found in the legislation itself that should provide more harmonization in some practical details of EPR. Then the transposition of the Waste Framework Directive into national legislation should be in place by June 2027, and the actual implementation on the ground should be in place by April 2028. As I mentioned, we're also supposed to have harmonized eco-modulation criteria, but this will have to be based on the ESPR, which is not ready yet. So we still have to see the timeline for this eco-modulation harmonized criteria. In terms of the next steps, for us, it is seeking harmonization on the transposition of the directive into all the 27 member states. Of course, we have to consider that there are existing EPR schemes yet, at least 4 to our knowledge, but these national EPR schemes might have to be adjusted based on the EU legislation, and some EPR schemes would have to start from scratch or be finalized depending on where the national developments are at this stage. So in the next few years to come, we expect a lot of developments on EPR at national level, and for us as an industry, harmonization is the key priority. Jumping quickly to end of waste criteria for textiles, this very simply defines when waste ceases to be waste and it becomes a secondary raw material. It is crucial to have a harmonized end of waste criteria for the sector for different reasons. And those include the need to recover the existing waste that we have and recognize it as value. Also, harmonization on this front will support having safe and high quality secondary raw material. It will also help to have a better developed market for reuse and recycling. It will also ease the movement of such materials across the EU, and it will support the implementation of Ecodesign legislation and EPR implementation, simply because there will be more clarity and better procedures to identify, for example, waste that could be channeled for recycling, at what point it would cease to be waste, and it will ease the procedures around the management of waste, which ultimately contributes to the objectives of also other circularity focused legislations. It will also provide legal certainty and avoid unnecessary administrative burdens. We indeed hear a lot of feedback from the industries that it is very unclear and burdensome to move such materials across the EU due to different procedures among member states, or simply lack of clarity on when recycled materials are waste or not. And we see that this harmonization would also contribute for that as well. Of course, there are important elements to take into account in the development of this harmonized end of waste criteria for textiles. I am sorry, there is some background noise, so I will mute you. I'm sorry for that. There are important elements to take into account, and those are the need to have an inclusive end-of-waste criteria to consider, of course, all fibers and technologies that are in the market, to be technologically neutral, not to have some restrictions here and there for different technologies, and of course, to be able to track the materials along the value chain. So it's not that easy for sure to come up with a well-designed, practical end-of-waste criteria for textiles. And the JRC, again, has been taking the lead on this for years, with the finalization of its work coming very soon, which will then be elevated at policy level. And to look at the timeline that I just briefly mentioned, the technical process that has been going by the JRC since 2023, it's coming to its end. We are having the final steps next month, when we will be looking at the final technical proposals on where the end of waste point should be placed. We're expecting to have stakeholder workshops to engage with the JRC to better understand the proposals. At that stage, the JRC will be handing over its technical work to the European Commission, and the decision on the next steps will be taken at political level, of course, and we expect that this will be within the context of the Waste Framework Directive, as the end of waste criteria stems from this piece of legislation. With this, I come to the second Q&A session, and now I saw a lot of exchanges in the chat, so I'm going to briefly scroll to see if there are any questions. I see a question if there is any settled goal for the amount, how much textile waste should be reused and how much should be recycled. I believe you referred to something that I mentioned about targets for reuse and recycling within the Waste Framework Directive revision. Within the current revision that we had of the legislation, it was decided that it was not possible to set any reuse and recycling targets because there was no clarity on the market and no sufficient data to support any targets. However, as I mentioned, there will be a review by 2029 of the legislation, and one of the review points is exactly the possibility to set such targets. So based now on the next few years' experiences of EPR, data will be collected to see how potentially targets can be set up in a way that would be feasible. Do you know when end of waste for textiles will be decided by the European Commission? We expect that the process should take place somewhere in 2026. However, I do not have more details on that. I do not see any more questions for the floor. So we'll move to the last part of this webinar, which will concern the Green Claims Directive proposal and the PEF category rules for apparel and footwear. I see that a couple of more questions are coming in. So if you're okay, I'm going to pause to be able to address them on time before we move to another topic. Is reuse being dropped down on the agenda for the Waste Framework Directive? It seems as if funds are going back into production on R&D and scaling textile recycling, which just allows more production to continue. There are also some other avenues where funds should from EPR should go, and the reuse sector was also mentioned. I do not have immediately the legislation in front of me, but I would advise you to look into it, and then you will see that recycling is not the only avenue where the EPR provides support. And generally, it also has to be noted that from looking at the legislation design from its outset, the Waste Framework Directive does support a lot the reuse sector and the social economy enterprises. Is there any minimum recycled fiber that should be contained in new textiles? Are the same percentage in all type of fibers? Okay, we do not have clarity yet on any potential minimum percentage of recycled materials for any fibers. This work is still ongoing within the Ecodesign framework, so within the ESPR, which we discussed first during this webinar, and that's done by the Joint Research Center of the Commission. At this point, the analysis is ongoing, and we do not have details on which specific criteria will be chosen and with what specific targets and thresholds. When will the Implementation Act for Eco-modulation be published? We do not have information on that either. We know that from the legislation that the Commission shall issue an implementing act for eco-modulation, but it should be based on the ESPR, and we understand from the Commission that they will wait for the eco-design legislation before they do the eco-modulation. So based on the timeline for the ESPR, with the legislation in 2027, we could only foresee that somewhere around that time, perhaps there could be a harmonized eco-modulation implementing act as well. Is there any concrete information on the documents that are necessary or certifications to register to a PRO yet? Unfortunately, I cannot give you detailed practical information on how PROs will function in the different member states, because this will also very much depend on from a member state to member state. So I would advise you to reach out to your national authorities in charge of EPR, or if you have already some kind of like an existing PRO structure at national level. I do not see any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to go back to the green claims and the PEF. And in the next 15 minutes, I will present to you the most relevant developments on these two topics. So when it comes to the Green Claims Directive proposal, it was an important initiative based on the figures that you see on the slides by the European Commission in 2023 to tackle greenwashing, because based on the numbers that you see on the slide, it sort of warranted that there must be a measure to improve the information that is given to consumers, and also the level playing field that companies have in the EU from the perspective of being able to clearly communicate their sustainability efforts and being able to use that as an avenue of competitiveness, and be able to have this fair competition on the market towards companies that may not have put the same efforts on that front. The legislation aimed to set up uniform rules on how to substantiate green claims. So there is a list of all elements that methodologies or some specific certification schemes should fulfill to be allowed to be used to substantiate a green claims. Also the way that these green claims were to be communicated to the consumer, and how labeling schemes would have been designed and adopted at national or EU level. So you see that these goals of the legislation were quite important for the EU markets, and we as an industry also supported the file going forward during the political negotiations, also since January 2025. However, due to some political changes and priorities at EU level, there is currently a standstill on this piece of legislation. a lot of industries and stakeholders raised specific concerns when it came to the clarity of the law and how it will be implemented in practice. And the process at this stage has been paused to be able to look into avenues on how to make it more clear and simplified. And of course, that would be based on the on political dynamics at national and European level. The very much linked to the green claims is the product environmental footprint methodology. It is specifically mentioned in the green claims proposal as an accepted methodology to substantiate green claims. And very broadly on what the PEF is, it is a metrics-based approach which allows for impact evaluations and comparisons to be made on scientific basis. It has a life cycle focus, so it considers all life stages of the product, from the extraction of raw materials through the use phase up to its end of life. It is a multi-indicator evaluation, which currently includes 16 environmental indicators that include, for example, climate change, water, land use, and it's internationally validated, being based on globally accepted ISO standards, and has been also recommended by the European Commission since 2013. We need to make a differentiation between this general PEF method that I just presented to you, which is the high-level modeling rules for any sector with the 16 impact categories and its own data requirements that are included in a specific environmental footprint database. And it also contains some specific verification processes to ensure that the process has been carried out in the appropriate way. This methodology can also be sector-specific, so it is adjusted to a certain extent to the needs of the specific sector and the different hotspots, and then you can have product environmental footprint category rules for a specific sector. It can be apparel and footwear, dairy products, tourism, or any other. And then these category rules have to be translated on the ground to a specific product. It can be a t-shirt, sneakers, or pants. And this is basically the practical exercise of taking the category rules and then testing them on a real product. Why do we need the PEFCR for apparel and footwear? We needed to define specific rules that are tailored for our sector, because you saw on the previous graph that we have the general PEF method, but then to be able to account for the specificities of the sector, we need specific category rules for that. It ensures a common framework to be used by companies to calculate the impact of their products. It increases the consistency in the way that products are being compared, so it allows for that framework of comparability. Having a harmonized methodology, of course, reduces costs and burdens for companies, and especially for SMEs. And it also importantly informs and encourages eco-design and innovation approaches, as it provides a possibility for companies to see where gaps are and where innovation could improve the way that their products are made. We already have an existing PEF category rules for apparel and footwear, which were finalized in April this year, and they have been officially published by the European Commission in May. The project that developed these category rules ran for 5 years, together with the industry, NGOs, governmental bodies, and the European Commission. There were some consultations in the process, independent expert reviews, and many supporting studies to test how the methodology was implemented on real-life products along the way. On the right side of the slide, you can see all the entities that were involved in this 5-year project, including EURATEX. And as the methodology exists at this point, it is very important to explain how it's being used and the next steps for it to avoid any confusion and misunderstanding across stakeholders. The existing PEFCR for apparel and footwear that was adopted by the Commission in May this year is a voluntary methodology for companies to use if they wish so. It is considered as a foundation to build on, and now we have a transitional phase for us to test and see how it performs, so we have the possibility to improve it in the future. Currently, the European Commission is performing a revision of the EF methods, which is expected to be finalized somewhere next year, most likely the first half of the year, which means that the existing PEFCRs would have to inevitably be revised. And that, of course, includes our PEFCR for apparel and footwear. This is why I mentioned that it is coming to a transitional phase that we support to be used for testing and to identify how we can improve it. There will also be a new EF database 4.0 in 2028, which also has to be reflected in the new PEFCR. So in terms of timeline, we expect that a new revision of the PEFCR for apparel and footwear would happen afterwards, once you have the new PEF method and once you have the new EF database 4.0. And for the future, we foresee that the PEFCR could inform some policies and EU legislation, for example, around eco-design, corporate sustainability reporting on green claims. But of course, we need to have a properly designed and implementable methodology that correctly reflects the impacts of all different fibers. And with this, I came to the end of my presentation overall and to the last Q&A session. So I have a few minutes to go through some of the questions that were placed in the chat. I saw there was a lot of exchange on the, I think on the PEF. So I'll try to fish out a few and then be able to finish on time. So I see. So there is a question if there is an internally verified LCA still valuable for green claims. It is not possible to have a third-party verified LCA. In what way can we use internally verified LCA and make it count for clients and regulations? I have to note here that the green claims legislation is still not adopted or enforced. So currently, the status quo remains as it was a few years ago, in this sense that you can use solutions that you have already used and external third-party verification is not required. So the green claims legislation will introduce third-party or ex-ante verification for claims. With a bracket, its aim to do that. We still have to see how it will be designed if approved. But at this stage, you do not have that. So it's just important to keep in mind that the green claims law is not even finalized at political level. I'm going to the next question, noting that the PEF is quite an issue for SMEs. We fully agree on that, and this is one of the main points that we have been raising as EURATEX, as we represent 200,000 SMEs in Europe. How can we make sure that SMEs have the same means to certify their products compared to big companies? We have been raising the same issues, as I said, and we have been looking into specific measures that could be there to ease the implementation of the PEF by smaller entities. Some specific solutions that we have looked into, for example, is a clear process for SMEs to participate in the development process, first of all, So what you saw on this 5-year project slide with the different entities, we want to also have a lot of SME participation there. And recognizing, of course, that they have limited resources, we have suggested to have funding in that regard or some specific simplifications for them to be actively engaged in the process. When it comes to the implementation of the methodology, again, funding, capacity building and trainings, information materials, all of these are measures that we have pointed to as possibilities to boost the capacities of smaller companies and overall scale up the implementation of the PEFCR. Could PEFCR be used as an indicator for consumers to evaluate if a product is sustainable? Currently, no. The PEFCR version that was published in May by the European Commission has an important disclaimer already on somewhere on the first 4 pages that it cannot be used for B2C communication when it comes to the single score, but only in terms of several impact categories. So if you have technically a different methodology that indicates you a single score or even some other impact categories, you cannot as a consumer really compare because there are different methodologies with different indicators. Of course, you can still communicate to your consumer your impacts, but comparability would not be possible simply because of the different methodologies. And generally, of course, if I might have misunderstood your question, but if the PEFCR can be used to indicate sustainability, the PEFCR as it currently stands has some good parts and of course some gaps and things that have to be revised and improved. But as I said, we consider that now should be a phase for testing it and improving it, and then having at some point a methodology that really represents the sustainability of products in a good way. Will the PEFCR be adopted into legislation? Will it only be used as a method? Will it become mandatory for companies? At this point, is it voluntary? As I said, it could potentially in the future be included as a method within the Green Claims Framework, but we still don't have the Green Claims legislation itself. So at this point, I could only speculate on this. And the last one that I'm going to take, given the time, will be the link between the PEFCR and the ESPR requirements. There could be links, and there are already links that we have seen. For example, in the Jersey study on textiles, they looked into the PEFCR categories of products, and they have also looked into, for example, some approaches for physical durability, some of the testing methods that are used there. And also the JRC has looked into the EF database. So these are 3 specific examples that I can give you for the links that have already been there in the process. And with this, I'm going to stop so we have sufficient time to close. But I guess that for any remaining questions, we can address offline, Lisbeth. Thank you very much to all for the engagement, and I hope you found this webinar useful.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina, for this clear and comprehensive overview of the European policy landscape. Today we covered a number of important developments, from the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products regulation and the revised Waste Framework Directive to the end waste criteria, the upcoming Circular Economy Act, and the latest on the Green Claims Directive and the PEFCR rules. Your insights into how these initiatives will impact textile circularity have provided valuable guidance for everyone, I think, who joined today. To everyone in joining today, thank you for your engagement and your questions. We hope this session helped clarify where European policy is headed and what it means for your research, your organizations, and the sector as a whole. Before we really close, a few quick reminders. The recording and slides will be shared with participants after the session. And if you'd like to stay updated on upcoming CISUTAC Sustainability Forum webinars, please keep an eye on our communication channels and mailing list. The next webinar will already take place on the 9th of December, and it's about circular business models, and it's hosted by Simone of RISE and Julia of STEM. And don't forget to register. Once again, thank you for joining us today and for contributing to this ongoing dialogue on textile circularity. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar on the 9th of December.